Okay, a question we recently received from a loyal viewer. Thank you. If you have other questions, please attach them to the comments or send them. You can always find, we'll put an email attachment up so you know where to send them. Are in-wall speakers better or worse than ceiling speakers? So, sold ceiling speakers for a long time. The modern in-wall speakers, I think, are fundamentally a better experience. So, in-wall versus ceiling. Is there a big compromise going in-wall? Okay.
In-wall's better, right? I'll say it there. The hard part, the deeper answer there is how do we get that application to work? Where do we actually put the speakers? How does it fit into it? But when we have the ability to have audio that comes at us, like we're hearing it, whether we're at a concert or we're watching it from a TV, that is the experience that we are used to getting and how we live. When we have a conversation or dialogue with someone, that audio is coming directly to us, to our face. And so we want to replicate that as much as possible whenever we can.
Yeah, I would say the only caveat to that is when we're doing background audio, one of the reasons we put speakers in the ceiling is because you're not going to move closer to or further away from the ceiling. So let's say you're having an event where you have a bunch of people over for a party, and some people are standing near the wall, some people are in the middle of the room, some people are in the kitchen. If you have speakers in the wall, you may have people moving much closer to or much further away from speakers, at which point it might make sense just to have them in the ceiling and spread the sound out more. But as Kevin said, like there's no recording studio in the world where people are singing down into a microphone. Like we talk to people on the same plane. If we can get our music to match that, it is a much more natural experience. There are just some considerations like where will I put them? Do I want to see them? Can I more easily hide them in the kitchen? For example, I like to put speakers near lights because when you look up towards a light, there's glare. Well, that glare masks the speaker. And so if I just don't want to see it and I don't have the budget to do an invisible, putting it near the light just kind of makes it disappear from view. That's a nice flexibility to have that you might not have with an in-wall speaker, but you are giving up some of that experience.
No, if you are going to put them in the ceiling, we can hide them. By the way, really hard to put them in concrete ceilings, so that might be another problem as well. But just a second on ceiling-based speakers. The big thing I've learned in the last few years, and I think our friends at Sonance demonstrate this really well. If you want to go to the Sonance, experience center, is two large 8-inch speakers are a very poor experience in a room compared to many more smaller speakers that deliver a more even coverage. Kevin, if you sound that in jobs you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And actually, Keith, great job of kind of adding some context into things. I think that when I think about quality of audio, I think about being able to experience like music or things. And sometimes we need to slow ourselves down and go, okay, well, what are we actually trying to accomplish, right? Are we trying to do something where we are entertaining all the time and we have friends and family over and we want that music to sound great there? Or is this something where we finally get to wind down at night and we just want to experience that in a very, maybe with our partner or with our family or something like that. And so it's a good idea to probably dive into the needs of that space when we think about in ceiling versus in wall. But to answer your question,
my house has
Nigel,
a mix, and that's how it probably should be.
Exactly right. We need different things in different areas based off of what's needed. But to answer Nigel's question and to kind of respond to that a little bit, yes, small speakers throughout a space, more even coverage, right? That gives us the ability to be able to move through our open spaces. So when we talk about kitchens and living rooms and dining spaces where we have multiple people in multiple different areas, we really want that to be even coverage as it comes out. And so that one person doesn't have a bunch of audio over the top of it, or you can't have a conversation over here in this corner or in this area because it's got too much audio hitting there. And so we want to kind of spread that stuff out. It lets us fill in the middle of things. If you think back to Disney World, you go to Disney with your family and you're kind of walking around and you hear this music and it's happening all over. It's the same thing we give you inside a house, and we can do that. And to be able to match the aperture of the lights, it's a game changer. It just looks so much better to be able to kind of make everything look uniform in the ceiling and have that beautiful and sound incredible.
So can you talk a bit about the technology? When people think about in-wall speakers, I think they're concerned, they're going to hide behind the wall. They're going to, how do you get sound through a wall? The fundamental technology has really jumped forward in the last few years, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it has changed a lot. So the first in-wall speaker was literally just a speaker mounted to essentially a sheet of plastic stuck in the wall. And whatever was behind that wall, so that open cavity, which is probably 18 or so inches wide versus, plus the height of the room, was the back of your speaker. That was like the box the speaker was mounted in. But as the installer, you have no control over that. Or as the speaker designer, you don't know what size wall that's going into. And so now we have speakers that can be fully boxed in, where the engineer can design a speaker to sound exactly the way they want to. And then that box just goes behind the wall and you only see that small grill. On top of that, we also now have invisible speakers, which can essentially be installed flush with the sheetrock and then mudded right over or wallpapered over, or even have a laminate wood put over them. And now you have it completely invisible. So it really, that visual aspect of, the speaker, like art, needs to be placed in the right spot, that completely goes away. And now all we have to worry about is the sound. And just because of the physics behind the way those speakers work, which, as I've said on earlier podcasts, I am not a physicist. I don't really understand it, but I've experienced it and it is true. The sound of those speakers sounds like it's coming from everywhere, not from this little half-inch tweeter. It sounds like it's coming from a space that may be like 3 or 4 feet wide by 3 or 4 feet tall. And that experience is really fantastic because as you walk around, it does kind of feel like this whole wall is singing to you. And it's hard to describe, but it is a phenomenal experience when done right. And to my point earlier about it sounding better when the speakers are in the ceiling when you're moving around a room, these invisible speakers kind of give you that dislocation of the sound, but still get it down on your plane. And it is just a really, really cool experience.
Yeah. I love invisibles because, earlier, Nigel, you'd made a comment about having like smaller speakers kind of throughout a space. And absolutely, that works. That's a great way to do it. But with invisible speakers, it actually takes fewer speakers to cover that same amount of space. So if you have a big open kitchen, living room, kind of family room, all combined, like one open space, we can do that with fewer speakers that are invisible and have the same coverage because their dispersion rate is so wide because it's a part of the ceiling. That whole plane is producing the audio that's coming out of it. And so you can get a really incredible coverage without gaps in areas as you move through those spaces. And it makes it very, very enjoyable.
And Kevin, you made a point, I think, earlier, but I want to get back to, which is there is a real design thought you have to get here. I mean, when the house is finished, don't come and ask us for invisible speakers because we can do it. But if you spend a lot of money on your wall coverings, and I've seen places with gold leaf on their wall, it's a bit late now to start thinking about this. So this is a great example, I think, of the earlier we're in the process, the better experience your home will have. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yes. And little things too, right? Like we think about wallpaper and we're like, oh, I'm not going to wallpaper that room. I can deal with that later. Well, that's not necessarily the case either, because if you're doing plaster or if you're doing, a high gloss wall finish or something like that, we want to make sure we're thinking through what those look like. And if you are doing plaster, there's very specific, like acrylic based plasters that you're supposed to be using so that it works for those applications. And so those are decisions that are being made very early in the process. And so having us involved, discussing what those finishes are in each space and making sure that we have it specified and that it's done correctly is really important.
Yeah, I'd say most of the houses where we're doing invisible speakers have these really smooth, fine finishes. It actually works out very well for us because what we're installing is a perfectly flat board that they get to put the finish on. When they do level 5 finishes, typically they won't use the same lumber they would use in a traditionally finished home because the lumber itself is too wavy to get that perfect finish. They will upgrade the lumber to get straighter boards. What we're putting in there works perfectly in that situation because it can be installed. We actually install it about a millimeter proud of the sheetrock, so it gets a slightly thinner coat. But we just have so much flexibility to work with, the sheetrock installers and the finishers to make sure we're doing exactly what they need to get the result they want, which kind of goes back to why it's so important to be in early, is because we will work with a lot of other trades to make this happen. But it's not something the client has to worry about as long as they get us all involved.
So there are
And to
two
circle back,
objections I hear, three maybe, when I talk to clients about this. And I think we've talked about a couple of them, but let's just dig in briefly on them. The first is, what do I do about subs? Because subs don't necessarily, I don't want the sub vibrating my wall and, making the whole house shake. So how do I solve for that?
Yeah, so there are many different ways that we could do subs, right? The traditional way of having a box subwoofer that sits in the corner or inside a cabinet, that's an option. We can do that. We can also do things where we have in-wall subs, right? Then we might end up with a big grill that's on the wall or a small grill, depending on the size of the subwoofer that the space needs. We can do subs that port through very small holes, and those can be hidden inside baseboards or toe kicks or different ways to kind of conceal that and make it go away. And then if we are doing these invisible speakers, they actually make invisible subwoofers that go along with it, and they really add a base level dimension that a lot of normal speakers don't have. And so each space, as we talk about what's needed in those areas, what the finishes are going to be in those areas, we can really tailor the right solution to kind of match up a subwoofer based off of what the needs are. Whether that's an in-wall or an in-ceiling, just like that, just like speakers can be, subwoofers can be done the same way as well.
Yeah, and I think it should be said that you don't have to be a music person to appreciate adding a subwoofer to a system like this. Like, it just makes it sound more realistic and more full, better. It makes it an experience. It's something that you kind of get this like emotional attachment to. Like, it makes music sound better, and not just at high volumes, at low volumes. In my previous house, we had an open kitchen living area, and anytime I listened to music in the kitchen, I would also turn on the living room speakers because we had subwoofers in there. And even though it was so quiet, you didn't hear the music like coming across into the space. You could kind of get that experience of that sub, adding that little bit of fullness and richness to it. And it got to the point where, like, even my wife, if I just turned on the kitchen speakers, would go, "Does it sound different?" Because she was used to having that more full music experience. And while she didn't care about the equipment, she got used to that experience and could tell when it wasn't there. So I think subs sound ridiculous for background audio until you experience it, and then you go, "Oh yeah, this is how I want to listen to my music."
Yeah.
All right. So second objection, you talked a bit about Keith, so let's just close this off. When you put an in-wall speaker in, is the person in the room next door, the other side, going to hear all of this? How do we solve for that?
If you don't plan for it, yes, that absolutely could happen. But we have the tools to solve that issue. So if we know ahead of time, we can insulate that wall, we can decouple it, or we can use these products that are specifically designed to send sound in only one direction. If somebody came in after the fact and said, "Hey, I want to put these in-wall speakers on my theater and those back up to my kid's nursery, and I don't have room to do any insulation or something like that," we would absolutely talk them out of it. It would be a bad decision. But I mean, Kevin, you experienced this. There's so many ways to solve these problems if we're in a situation early enough.
Yeah, in your theater example, you couldn't watch a movie past 8:30 in my house. Otherwise, you just end up waking the kids up all the time. Yes, so there are options to deal with in-wall speakers that go into it. The earlier we are involved, the better. Most in-wall speakers have like boxes that go into the framing, and it acts like a speaker, like a wood-based speaker, something that was made to sit on your floor to stop that audio from transferring into the adjacent space. As a speaker moves, as it moves forward, it's producing audio that's going that way. As it retracts and comes back in, it's sending it that way. So we've got to have something on the backside of that speaker so that it's not moving in to another space as it goes through it. There are also retrofit products that work for this as well. And there's products where they're almost like Dynamat, back box things, kind of rubbery materials where you can like put them into the wall and the speaker fits into it. And that helps. So if you found yourself in a scenario where you've got a room that's getting a lot of audio, even from a floor to a ceiling above it, those are really good solutions to help you reduce that audio transfer from one space to another.
I actually think you've prompted an idea maybe for our next conversation, which is about soundproofing and sound insulation and all those things that we can do to make, physically the sound. But I do want to end with the final objection, which I know I've heard answered really well, which is things break. I've installed this in my wall. I've put fancy covering over it, and it breaks. Who's paying to fix the wall when you fix the speaker?
Kevin.
Yeah,
Kevin will cover
it. And then I would say the manufacturers would cover it. No, so here's the beauty. right? Like, it's probably the number one objection I get when people talk about doing invisible speakers. It's like, oh my gosh, now it's a part of my ceiling or my finish or my wallpaper or whatever it is. What am I going to do if there's something that goes wrong? The really great thing is to blow up a speaker, you have to pump really bad amplification into it. It's not going to just die. One, we test it when it goes in. When we wire it in at the very beginning during framing, we're testing that speaker. We're playing music through it. We're testing it to ensure that's working. So we have a point right there. When we get to the end and we're trimming it out, before the house is finished, we're doing a hot punch on the house to make sure things are going well, everything's working. We're playing that music again to ensure that nothing happened to it during construction, that nobody went in and nicked a wire or adjusted framing or did something to it, and we just weren't aware of it. So we test it again at that point. We know that we have that. Those speakers are developed where they have special protections that are built into them so that they don't break. It doesn't matter if your kid picked up your phone and slid the volume control to 100% on some sort of EDM high bass music, and it's sending terrible quality audio to that speaker. It will cut all that off and make sure it only takes what it can actually use. And so there's protections that are built into it. And and because of that, the manufacturers will give us warranties on it. If it goes bad, if it breaks, because they know it's not going to, but if it did for any reason, they will cover it, and they will cover the cost to repair the space of what is used there.
And I think that's the critical point, that if this is something you want to do and you want to get involved in, then we will work with the suppliers to make sure that there's some level, insurance may be too much of a word, but coverage that should this happen, we will fix it and make things right. Obviously within reasonable doubt, if you're throwing hand grenades around the place, we're not going to fix that. But if the technology breaks, it's our fault, or the manufacturer's fault, we will fix that for you and make that look good.
Yeah, and we've been doing this for a very long time, right? Like, invisible speakers are not things that came out this week. They've been going for 10 plus years now. I've replaced one invisible speaker, and it was not because the speaker went bad. It was because electrician was getting ready to add a light in for some artwork that was going on a wall, and he drilled through our invisible speaker. And so that is the only invisible speaker I can say of all the years I've been doing this, and I've been doing it for many, many years, selling many, many invisible speakers. It's the only one that ever needed to be replaced.
Which is funny because we specifically don't install them at the level you would hang pictures so that doesn't happen, and you still manage to have someone find it.
Yeah. So I would really encourage people to look at the invisible speakers. I think they even work great in a living room with your TV. So we talked last time about soundbars. Hey, if you really want to make that soundbar disappear, we can put the speakers in the wall and give you surround around. We can put them above you and around you. It's a really good experience, and it's a very nice way, if you don't have a home theater, to turn your living room into a great home theater without lots of boxes and wires and cables.
And I will add, people have probably, like, if you went online right now and researched invisible speakers, you would see a lot of advice not to use them in an area where you really care about the sound. And to be honest, that was true until a few years ago. The products we install now, I would gladly put them in my theater. They are that good. So, if somebody is seeing conflicting advice, just know that as of, it was probably 21, 22, that has absolutely changed. And there's nothing to be scared of now.
And if you're serious about them and you want to hear them, let us know. We have places to take you.
Yeah. Come to Houston. Houston actually has invisible speakers that sit right above 2 tower speakers, and the music plays, and people think it's coming from the tower speakers. That's how good the quality it is. So I concur. They're fantastic now. They really do sound incredible.